All right, and welcome to 1.1 East Asia. There we go. Today's overarching questions that we're going to be looking for are what made China's golden age possible during the Tang and Song dynasties? How did each empire expand, maintain their control, trade, political power, influence of religion, that kind of thing? What are the lasting or most important legacies of the Tang and Song Empire? And how are these empires different? And how are they similar? China never invaded Japan, but was a huge influence on them. They supported Confucianism and Buddhism. Students learned Chinese. They learned literature in Chinese. Court records are in Chinese. And they continued to practice Japanese religion, such as Shinto, but early Japan was highly influenced by China.
Japan is an island by the sea filled with volcanoes, and it's in the year negative a billion, Japan might not have been here. In the year negative 40,000, it was here, and you could walk to it, and some people walked to it. Then it got warmer, some icebergs melted, it became an island, and now there's lots of trees because it's warmer. So now there's people on the island. They're basically sort of hanging out in between the mountains, eating nuts off trees, and using the latest technology, like stones and bowls. Ding dong, it's the outside world, and they have technology from the future, like really good metal and crazy rice farms. Now you can make a lot of rice really, really quickly. That means if you own the farm, you own a lot of food, which is something everybody needs to survive. So that makes you king. Rice farming and rice kingdoms spread across the land, all the way to here. The most important kingdoms were here, 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 and here. But this one was the most important, ruled by a heavenly superperson, or emperor for short. Knock knock, get the door, it's religion. The new prince wants everyone to try this hot new religion from Biekt. Please try this religion, he said. No, said everybody. Try it, he said. No, said everybody again, quieter this time. And so the religion was put into place, and all the rules that came with it. Then the government was taken over by another clique, and they made some reforms, like making the government govern more, and making the government more like China's government, which is a government that governs more. Hi, China, they said. Hi, dipshit, said China. Can you call us something else other than dipshit, said Japan. Like what, said China. How about Sunrise Land, said Japan. And they stole China's alphabet and wrote a book about themselves. And then they made lots of poetry and art and another book about themselves. Then they stopped moving the capital every time the emperor died and kept it in one place for a while, right here. And they conquered the north, finally. Get that squared away. A rich hipster named Kukai is bored with modern Buddhism, visits China, and learns a better version, which is more spiritual. Comes back, reinvents the alphabet, and causes art and literature to be great for a long time. And the royal palace turned into such a dream world of art that they really didn't give a shit about running the country. So if you live outside the palace, how are you supposed to protect your shit from criminals? Hire a samurai. Everyone started hiring samurai. Rich, important people hired samurai. Poor people who could not afford to hire samurai did not hire samurai. The samurai became organized and powerful, more powerful than the government. So they made their own military government here. They let the emperor still be emperor, but the shogun is actually in control.
All right. So as you see, we have this change, and we are going to stop here because you have the Japanese emperor is going to move the court to Heian or in Kyoto. Emperors are just figureheads. They're weak, but there is power behind the throne. So civil wars begin and clans turn into full wars, and the Minamoto family won and instituted the shogun, which is the military governor of Japan. This allowed the emperor to stay on the throne, but the shogun had the most power. So the shogun is the leader. The shogunate is going to be his land. So kind of like a king is your king, and then its kingdom is the land. That's kind of how we're going to remember that. So as you see here, you have the Kamakura and the Muromachi periods, which are going to basically be medieval Japan. Feudalism arises. You're also going to see feudalism in Europe, but it's going to look a lot different in Japan than it does in Europe. It's the same ideas. So you might have heard of the Code of Chivalry. Well, in Japan, to the samurais, this is going to be Bushido, which is the code of honor followed by samurai. There's frugality, loyalty, martial arts, honor until death. So the Bushido, if you've ever seen like in samurai films or things when someone is disgraced or lost in battle, then they commit this ritual suicide, which is the seppuku. So here's how it kind of broke down. The shogun gives land to the daimyo. The daimyo then gives land to the samurai in order for loyalty and protection to go back up. And then when you get down to the peasants, the samurai protect the peasants, and the peasants provide food for the samurais. I'm going to skip this. You can kind of watch it if you would like to. Actually,
Right. You know, we have
it's just a way to memorize, but this one's my favorite one. So we are going to start here with the Chinese dynasties.
生周秦汉隋唐宋，元明清 Republic 毛泽东。上周秦汉隋唐宋，元明清 Republic 毛泽东。Chinese dynasties, Chinese history, it's been going on for thousands of years. Chinese dynasties, Chinese history, lots of war and lots of tears. 上周秦汉隋唐宋，元明清 Republic 毛泽东。
So this is just a way for you to remember the dynasties in order. So we're looking today at Shang,
上周秦
Zhou
汉隋唐宋，元明清 Republic 毛泽东。
We're going to be looking at the Song and the Tang. So we have the restoration of imperial China. After the collapse of the Han Dynasty, China fell into a deep civil war. One family, the Sui, brings order out of the chaos, and they create massive projects, including the Grand Canal, to increase trade. They had to levy high taxes, and they used compulsory or mandatory labor. But this dynasty was only 37 years, but their projects and policies last much, much longer. So the Grand Canal actually is one of the most elaborate trade projects that was ever created. It increased trade with northern and southern China, and it is about 1,240 miles long. So people were kind of pissed about having to have this conscripted labor, but there were also a bunch of military failures in Korea that prompted rebellion, and the emperor is assassinated kind of because of this Grand Canal. But it does connect northern and southern China and allow for trade goods to move more easily throughout the country. So the Tang used 3 of the Sui policies to stabilize the dynasty. So transportation and communication networks, they used roads, horses and human runners. They had inns, postal stations, and then of course the Grand Canal. You have the equal field system where the government owned all the land in China and they handed it out to families based on their ability to work. So the more children you had, the more land you got. This reverts back to government ownership after the death of the head of the household. Okay, this prevents a land gentry, meaning like a land holding wealth that creates a power base that takes power away from the average person or commoners, and that's what they were trying to avoid. And then lastly, the imperial civil service examinations, which you read about. This is a Confucian educational curriculum, Paleophyety. Education is widely available, and it built loyalty to the dynasty, and this system remains really strong even up until into the early 20th century. The Tang conquered areas of Manchuria, Korea, Vietnam, and Tibet. It's one of the largest expansions of Chinese history, and this is where they create the tributary system. The tributary system has its roots in these expansions because they wanted people that they have taken over to say, yes, you are our overlords. We are going to give you tribute. So it's either taxes or goods. And this is because the Chinese looked at these Manchurians, these Koreans, these Vietnamese, and these Tibetans as inferior to them and that they needed to be subordinate. So they forced them to perform what's called the kowtow as well to anyone that was Chinese, where they have to bow. So all foreign diplomats that come in contact with any Chinese members of the dynasty have to show that China is superior by basically subjugating themselves in this bow. The government didn't really take care of the people towards the end of this, and so the emperor has spent all this tax money showing his favorite concubine in jewels. A concubine's basically like not a prostitute, but kind of like a prostitute. It's just a woman that is used for like carnal pleasure for the emperor. And so he becomes obsessed with music and entertainment, and he's not really governing. And so there's a whole bunch of internal rebellions, and the military does not side with the emperor. And so for the next 50 years, East Asia is going to be constantly attacked by nomadic groups, and it is going to create a distrust of all things that are seen as quote unquote foreign for the next 300 years. So Song Tazu is the first Song emperor that takes control. He was a former military leader, and he was made emperor by the troops. He emphasized civil administration, industry, education, and arts over the military. He favored meritocracy, where you go and you show your worth. You're not just given something because your dad was a military member. You automatically are going to be given that, or your dad was in the government, you don't get that spot. This creates a more centralized imperial government than had ever been seen before. But they have two big problems. One is money, right? And this is because the rewarding of government officials meant that the peasants were highly taxed. And two is the problem with the military. The civil government officials did not have military training, so they're unable to contain these nomadic attacks. And this increases the dislike of all foreign beliefs, good, and people that we saw earlier. Despite these problems, the Song's dynasty had a huge boom in technology. You've got porcelain, which we still use today, iron production, gunpowder is invented, the movable type print where you have like a little, you can see it here, you have a little stamp almost, and then you can put it together and more easily produce books. And then you have naval technology that's going to assist with trade. If you'll see this, we all hear famously of the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria that Columbus used to arrive in the Americas. But the naval technologies with the Chinese ships, like the junk ship that you see here, you can see how much larger the Chinese junk ship was to the European caravel. This is a patriarchal society, which means that patriarch, men are going to be in charge. Continued nomadic attacks lead the Song to isolate themselves. Ancestor worship and historical veneration, which is looking back at the past as events as better, becomes popular. And this is when foot binding is going to gain popularity amongst the upper class. Women of privilege were placed under tight supervision of their husbands or fathers. So this is a form of social mobility for them. So foot binding, they were seen as attractive because this meant that the women didn't have to do anything, that they were affluent enough to where they didn't need to. So under the Tang Dynasty, there is a decline in the confidence of Confucianism. After the collapse of the Han, people begin to really gravitate towards Buddhism. So if we look at the difference, Buddhism is text-based and it's Buddha's teachings. There's an emphasis on metaphysics. There is an idea of celibacy and isolation, and it taught that women should have more rights. This becomes very popular under the Tang Dynasty. versus Confucianism, also text-based. Taoism is not text-based, but there's an emphasis on ethics and politics, and it's very family-centered around procreation, creating bigger families, filial piety, which is essentially where youth are endowed to their parents, and then the parents to the grandparents. And so there's this hierarchy of reinforcing patriarchy. So let's say you're the oldest boy of the family, you have more power and more clout than any of your sisters or your mom or your grandmother. And then it would be your dad, then it would be your grandfather in the hierarchy. So your grandfather being the top if he was still alive, then your dad, then you, then your grandmother, then your mother, then your sister. So it kind of goes down like that. This is very popular under the Song dynasty. My bad. The Song dynasty didn't persecute Buddhists, but they did support Confucianism, and they didn't want to have as much foreign control or foreign religions under their control. So Confucians do study Buddhist text, and you have Zhu Xi, who is a philosopher who blended traditional Confucian thought with ideas of Buddhism. This is where we're going to get Neo-Confucianism. All right. Make sure that you have filled out your notes, and you are going to be using the textbook in the next part to do a graphic organizer with Spice Tea.